Tonight, I drive a Golden Murray. And James... And I'm James. No, that's the wrong... Derek drives a Japanese V10 car and hates it.
And I wear a hat. Just kidding, I don't have any hats. Jason wears a hat. On this week's episode of the Carmudgeon Show, part of the Haggerty Podcast Network, I'm Derek Tam-Scott. This is Jason Mary Cammisa.
What?
I don't know your middle name.
It's Marie.
Oh, sorry.
Jason Marie.
What else have we forgotten? Anything?
Well, we can do the whole Haggerty Drivers Club thing, but this episode is abound. We're going to talk about the Lexus LFA, which I've, in last week's Revelations episode, said was the best sounding vehicle ever made. And I might have to amend that because I did get a ride in the Golden Murray Automotive T.50.
And it sounded good.
Might have sounded better in the car. And we're going to talk about brake fluid and basically why. Oh, the original NSX. And we talk about a bunch of random things all to do.
Shockingly.
Well, shocks. Yes, we did talk about a Mercedes AMG that has shocks that are filled with uncompressible lead. Yes. Yeah. Great. So we'll have all of that and more. If you like this content, you might consider joining the Haggerty Drivers Club, which includes unlimited guaranteed 24/7 flatbed tows for all of your classic vehicles, a subscription to and when I say I mean Haggerty's award-winning magazine, discounts and VIP special events, and unlimited access to our valuation tools. There's a link below. You might join there. Otherwise, you can fast forward through this section while Derek claps and we play the deep, deep, deep music. Not bad.
Thank you.
Okay. It's still a thing. It's still like a, thing.
Whatever. It's functioning. On to the jingle.
So after you tortured me about the idea, after you said that you change your brake fluid every 2 years, I went back and looked at all of my cars, and I have a spreadsheet called Brake Fluid Embarrassment, and it's not that bad. I mean, other than the Honda Beat, which I have no record of the fluid having ever been changed. I mean, I have no records for the car anyway.
Well, how does it look?
It's fine.
I usually do it as a precautionary measure when I first buy something.
So, I mean, the cars are 0 years old, 0.8, 0.8, 2.0, 3.3, 5.0 for the e-Golf, doesn't use its brakes, 6.6, 7, 10, 12, and 13. Ooh, so I'm going to do the 13-year-old. That's my E30 wagon. Although I could have very easily done the fluid and just, when I did pads last, which was not
and just failed to document it.
Yeah.
But you just checked it, right? With this little handy-dandy
I didn't know there was a
device.
Thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it has 0% water in it.
Liquid tester. Yeah, it tells you how much water is in your brake fluid, allegedly.
I don't usually go swimming in my cars, so I guess they shouldn't have water in them.
Well, it naturally absorbs. This all happened because we had to do an unconsensual brake rebuild. Is that a thing? I guess it is now. Non-consensual brake system rebuild due to corrosion from failure to be on top of it. This was in one of my mother's cars.
I am going to do all of it.
And I try to be hands off, but when the brakes caliper started sticking, I was like, let's maybe investigate. And they're like, it's full of rust in here. Everything needs to be redone. And it was. But anyway, so but that car lives in a human environment. Anyway, that's not why we're here today. We are here today.
We are gathered here
today, dearly beloved.
Because I made a mistake.
Tell us about.
In last week's video, which was a Revelations episode on the LFA, Lexus LFA, I said that no car produced before or since the LFA sounds better. Mm-hmm. And then I got a ride in a car that was produced after the LFA, and I think it might have won.
Really?
Yeah.
It sounded better. And it is a turbocharged V6 automatic. Is it a minivan? Is it a Chrysler Pacifica?
That Pentastar, let me tell you, that sounds great. That's a fat sound from the double overhead camshafts, and the sound of glass shattering from my accent. I got a ride in the Gordon Murray Automotive T50.
And it sounds good.
It sounds amazing.
Was it you who said that you heard a video of it and that you were concerned it was going to be too perfect, devoid of character? Did you think I might have potentially forgotten that? I don't know if you said that on air or whether you said it to me directly.
Probably did, because I've said it quite a lot. It would the car on every video and audio recording I've heard of it. It sounds sanitized. It sounds too perfect and almost sounds like a trombone just doing a perfect. And it's not in person. It's it's dirty.
Oh, good. Yeah. Excellent. This is what we wanted.
So I will say I was in the car. I was not outside of the car. But in the car, it actually sounds filthier. And so it's got an air scoop over the passenger compartment. The ride that I got was with Dario Franchitti, who we're now besties. I'm just going to go move in, hang out with him because he doesn't know this. But
speaking of unconsensual,
no, we had a really fun time. But he was explaining to me that part of
Do you want to contextualize who he is for those listeners who do not know who Dario Franchitti is?
Famous racing car driver.
There you go. Perfect.
And now brand representative for GMA. But so he took me for a ride, and we were talking about the sound that was coming from the intake.
What sort of drive did we go on?
About an hour and a half.
What kind of conditions?
Back mountain road. So it started in a town, up a mountain pass on to sort of LA's canyon roads, and then back. Smooth pavement, open sort of corners. I told him that I was a terrible passenger because I am, and I think that slowed him probably way down. Which I only half regret because I'm like, would he have been sliding around stuff? I don't know what he would have done. But I never,
when I ride with a professional driver, tell them to slow down.
I'm a really nervous passenger, especially on roads like that, because the roads outside of LA you could easily do most of the corners at
yes, they're very fast.
Yeah. And I just don't want to be doing 130 miles an hour or when someone, on a straightaway, when someone comes around a corner crossed up in the wrong lane and everyone dies.
Especially on those roads, people are out there hooliganing about.
Yep. So apparently there was a bunch of engineering put into that air scoop, because if the carbon in that air scoop was too thin, it would resonate too much and sounded cheap and like a rattle.
Yes.
And if it was too thick, it wouldn't resonate enough. But you don't hear that, and especially the external videos of the car. All you hear is this, perfectly sanitized, a sort of anesthetized V12 sound. Not in the car at all. The amount of different noises you hear is among the best of any car that I've ever been in terms of the depth and complexity of hearing mechanical noise change with load, and then just intake and exhaust. It's just this perfect symphony of V12 noises that I think might have dethroned the LFA. All right, so the thing about the LFA was Lexus put a shit ton of development time into sound, right? So Yamaha's piano division, musical instrument division, did the engine sound, and outside it's the best sounding V10, right? It's close to the Carrera GT. They're both. Carrera GT is dirtier. It's an odd fire, and this is an even fire. The LFA is V10. But the interior noise on the LFA...
In no comparison between the two. Inside.
Between Carrera GT. Carrera GT sounds like shit.
Yeah, it sounds like a dump truck.
Yeah.
Or a garbage truck. Cement mixer.
Yeah, it's not... It's so people are so surprised to hear that. But the LFA's...
if you have the windows up and the roof on, and all you hear is the noise coming through the firewall. Because if you have the windows open, you can hear some of the outdoor noise, and then it sounds okay.
Yeah. I've only ever driven it with the roof on, and it just wasn't... It's just... it sounds, unimpressive.
Yeah.
But the LFA...
A little truckish, like Vipery.
Yeah. I wouldn't go that far. But the LFA has...
Maybe I
yes, you should play it.
Find it, but it's...
I did a video at ACME too, and I think I just had mics in the inside of the car on that drive, and it just you're like, that's 8,000 RPM. That's not impressive. But the LFA has channels, and it has multiple channels to let the audio in. It has bass channels, basically. First of all,
which they bring into the footwells, right? So they come from below physically,
right? And the way they did it was they stacked it. It was 3 different heights of intakes that resonated in the car.
Yeah, that were ported in through the firewall.
Yep, and the entire intake manifold itself is called it's not a manifold or a collector. I don't remember what Lexus called it. It's basically a sound box. It was designed to do the same thing that a violin.
Yes, to resonate at certain parts of it. There were things in it that were meant to resonate. I've always wanted to, of course, for obvious reasons, I've never done this. I've wanted to put my head at different parts of the interior of the LFA to hear different frequencies. You see if the character of the noise underway changes.
It probably would.
Yeah, based on what they designed, it should sound different based on your height.
Your height, yeah, that's true. But the whole thing sounds a little bit. If I have one criticism of the LFA, it's that it sounds a little bit synthetic, right? And there's just
It's engineered.
Yeah, it's engineered.
It's not technically synthetic, but it is engineered.
Yeah,
like it's not synthetic the way that speaker engine noises are.
What you're hearing is authentic, but it's definitely exciting different resonances of different things. And inside the car, while it sounds way better than CGT, it still comes across as somehow 10% inauthentic. And the GMA, the T50 doesn't. Plus it revs to 12,000 RPM. But I will say that if that thing only revved, that Cosworth V12 only revved to $7,000, the experience of driving that around would still make it the best sounding V12 ever. Okay. And surprise, the biggest surprise for me of the whole thing was that it does not have 6-into-1 headers. So I was talking with one of the engineers, and I said, we sort of define the V12 story as the sort of carbureted stories, chapter 1, and then the fuel injected cars that sound like crap is chapter 2, and then you have the sort of 6-into-1 header design modern V12 that really have that high pitched scream. And this car is not 6-into-1.
Really?
It's 632.
How did they do that?
I don't know. But
your theory is maybe not entirely borne out by empirical evidence in this particular circumstance.
In other words, I made another mistake. But whatever. Whatever.
You said it that way, not me.
The thing sounds fucking magical.
Okay.
Just...
I wonder if they experimented with different arrangements or...
the only
fundamental architectures.
So apparently T33, which is the sort of entry level baby car, has different exhaust routing, and it's still 632 exhaust, but the pipes are right next to each other, and they did that for scavenging because there's so much air coming out of each one of those pipes that in the sort of low pressure in between the pulses, it will actually help scavenge through the other side.
Holy shit.
And they said
that doesn't apply to the T50?
They are far apart.
I know, but why wouldn't they do that in the T50 if it's the flagship?
If they didn't need it.
It's the second car, potentially.
That's the 12. So there are other things about the T50 has 2 plenums. So it runs as 2 straight 6s. In fact, and then it exhausts as 4 3-cylinders, if you think of it that way. But the T33 apparently has 1 large plenum. Instead of the split. It loses 1,000 RPM, which they apparently didn't need the split plenum for then. Don't know why. But and the exhaust round, and they said it sounds totally different. I can't wait to hear that.
Oh, interesting.
But that might dethrone. I kind of need to have them together, but might dethrone the LFA as the best sounding car ever made.
Do you have any other commentary to provide on the T50 that we should discuss in terms of how it functions?
The only criticism I can levy is that it's probably the best driver's car in the world, and I didn't get to drive it. It is a tight cabin. It was really hot out.
Did you sit left seat or right seat?
I sat left seat because the shifter's on the right, so there's more room. It's a great view, so I could actually watch everything Dario was doing. I could watch his hands, I could watch his feet, and so I could see what sort of games he was having to play to catch the revs on the way down because it has effectively no flywheel weight. And I could see the steering feedback. So it does have electric power assist, but it declutches. So there is once you're moving, there's no...
At what speed?
Nope.
20...
I didn't ask.
Something.
I didn't ask. I think it's only very, very low speeds. But so by declutching the electric motor, you're removing the drawbacks of EPAS, which is a dampening mass. Dampening. Whatever. I know. You always get I did that and you didn't call it out.
I was just processing the car.
A damping mass on the steering column that dampens out so much of the feel. But you could actually watch it even on a smooth road with any sort of ripple. I'd be able to see the wheel move in his hands. The whole thing struck me as a really grown up Lotus Elise.
That's high praise.
That's as high as it gets. I mean, if the idea of spending millions of dollars on a car is all about the experience, I mean, on paper, we all saw what Gordon Murray's philosophy was. And so he went from being our hero to the hero, right? I mean, everyone sort of agrees on that. If I would say this car is more of an experience in the passenger seat than almost every supercar I've ever driven has been in the driver's seat. Hear everything, rides like a dream.
This is one of the characteristics of the F1 that I really distinctly remember also.
As being
the ride quality.
Yeah. Like it's firm-ish, you think, but like we flew over a speed bump at a speed that I didn't do in the Kia EV6 GT that I had. And I just thought, like, this is ridiculous. Right over a speed bump. Like, didn't care.
Yeah.
And there are no active shocks.
To me, that's a Gordon Murray hallmark in a car also.
So Dario was saying they were tuning the car for Scottish B roads, right?
So firmness like a modern Ferrari with bumpy road button pushed, or
no,
better?
More compliant than that. Oh. Yeah, I mean, I guess the front engine V12 cars are pretty supple on. So you'd have to get newer than a 599 wouldn't work, but F12 is reasonably comfortable. It's kind of hard to tell because we were on mostly smooth pavement, but you just sort of notice that bumps are one and done. There were no bump stop excursions. He didn't slow down for anything really.
Noise, because that's always the thing in the Lotus.
No bad
impact noises.
No. None of the sort of Lotus Elise sort of the interior feels like it's cracking apart. I mean, that's part of the Lotus experience that I like, is that the car just, you're in something structurally sound, but that the body is bolted to. So you always hear the body moving against the frame in an Elise. The only other car I can compare it to is that MAT New Stratos, which also I described as like a big boy Lotus Elise. It was a Lotus Elise with a flat plane crank V8. And the idea is it's not comfortable, right? It's not, its job isn't to isolate you from anything. Right. I'm sure there is a lot of isolation from things you don't want to feel, but everything that I felt other than the heat, again, it was really hot out, inside the T50 was pleasant. We did a tunnel run. I have a video of it. It was spectacular. I mean, just hearing, there's nothing, fans of turbocharged engines have not experienced really talkative, naturally aspirated engines because the depth.
Or they don't speak the language.
I'm sorry. That's like, no.
You don't think so?
They're just wrong. There's a tone change in a turbocharged car that comes boost or not, right? And you have a layer of turbocharged noise, but the complexity of sound of a really, really talkative, naturally aspirated engine, I'm not talking about exhaust noise, I'm talking about mechanical intake noise, is that constantly throughout the rev range, at every point in rev and every point in load, the pitch and the attitude changes of the car. And you hear so much, it's just cruising up this mountain Dario was in fifth gear almost the entire time, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 RPM, right? Which is sort of cruising. Like you think 5,000 RPM is barely more than a third of the way up the tack in this thing, which is insane. Just in that range, without having that huge build of revs that you'd need in most other cars, the sound was constantly changing. Every time he laid into the throttle, you hear just a note change. It was just a feast for the ears. Love it.
Function of having a lot of throttle bodies, I imagine, because it happens in carbureted cars when they are very carbureted.
That was their goal. So when I got it immediately. I wasn't surprised by any of this, but I got it immediately. Their goals were, according to everything that I was told, like V12 Elise, British B road, basically, which is our kind of roads, like slower and really bumpy, sort of cambery roads. Yeah. But then also throttle response of a carbureted car and the sound of a carbureted car. And they did it. No question. Car is fucking unbelievable. I can't wait to drive it.
So what do mortals do?
Or you can have a lease. You can have
an old car.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm trying to think of something that envelops you with noise like that.
Gullwing.
A really good Datsun 240Z.
Yeah, definitely.
That's up there. Yeah, a Ferrari, the 308 GT4.
Yeah,
that's another one. Gordon Murray owns one, probably for not
the V6s are like that too.
Oh, the D246.
Dinos,
yeah, not quite as much.
These are not mortal cars, by the way, except for the lease is like mortal adjacent, I guess.
Not really.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of, but Mark I Volkswagens are really talkative, but not. I mean, different league. VR6 cars are really talking. A VR6
there's not
and
as
a
much
Mach
texture.
1. No, not even close. Sucks. I can't have anything like it. But, oh well. So I made a mistake, but we did do a LFA video, and you have done an LFA video. So why don't you tell the world why LFA is overrated, underrated? You like it? You hate it? What's the dealio?
The more I learned about it, the more impressed by it I was, but it was a sort of... I didn't like driving it as much as I thought I was going to based on everything that I knew about it from researching it. And
one of these more like I respect it more than I love it, so an emotional thing.
Yeah, it was a bang, not a marry, for sure. For me. There's two fundamental reasons that I identified for that. One was the gearbox, of course. And the other was that it was so focused that I didn't feel like I could really meet the car under most circumstances. There was so much that you had to be on just the right set of circumstances, just the right roads. Like it was garbage at doing bumpy roads, and it's the firmness of its ride and its sort of unsettled and nervous and like scariness on the type of roads that I most like is something that just was not made it fundamentally not a me car. And so this is a reflection of my own subjective preferences, but it took me all day of spending time with the car before I finally found circumstances where I felt like I liked and understood the car, which means that you could drive the car 10 days and never drive it in the environment where it could really show you its stuff. And when it was showing me its stuff and I was in the right place, there was a fast open road that was very smooth, then I was like very, very impressed by it. But then the rest of the time that I was in it, I felt sort of vaguely uncomfortable and that I wished it would do different things than it was doing. So it was really focused in a way and optimized for things that aren't particularly important to me personally.
I mean, you have far more seat time in this car than I do. I mean, I've driven it on a lap or two of a track, and in the video from Automobile back in the day, on an autocross course, and the car was just uncontrollable. I mean, it was very...
That was my impression too. Like, it felt very knife edge. I always felt like I was on the cusp of potentially losing it.
You were. And the feedback that I gave to Toyota, because the car that I drove again in the video was an early, not the Revelations video, the automobile video, was an early build prototype car, and I begged them to please put a stronger spring in the accelerator pedal. And the reason that I had such a hard time controlling it on an autocross course was just the weight of my foot moving around
as you're bouncing because it's so firmly sprung.
Yeah. It was enough to really unsettle the car. And then for the video, I drove it a total of 6 miles. I mean, it was just, I drove it, did that back road thing, came back in, and I was obviously not comfortable I'm almost never comfortable in any cars. We talked about this 850 CSI. I was immediately comfortable. Not because it's my car, it's just because it feels like an M3.
Yes. There's a linearness and naturalness to the E36 M3, and your 850 CSI also possesses it that car does not have to me. I always felt ill at ease in it. Unless the road was super smooth and fast, and then it was brilliant. But the rest of the time, which was 90+% of the time, or in the real world, maybe more, like there's an element of like gnarliness to it and mastery, which is kind of intriguing, I guess, in the same way that like a Countach is. But
But to me, there's a mismatch with the engine, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
So that engine
and
is
in a Countach, it's like it's a functional sort of difficulty of getting it to do things, and once you learn how to do it, then it's predictable and like it rides pretty well, and it doesn't feel life or death. In a Countach, you're just like not very good at using it, whereas one is not very good at using it, and it calls you out for that. In the LFA, I felt like there was like proximity to death that I wasn't totally on board with.
I mean, look, there is a definite proximity to death. I mean, the most upsetting thing about doing research on that car was learning what happened to Naruse, who was the chief tester for the car.
But that was like someone who made an unsignaled turn in his path or something.
He had a head-on.
Yeah, I knew it was a head-on
with a BMW that was being driven by two BMW test engineers, but they were on the BMW side of the road. So it was a long sweeper, and he crossed over the double yellow and had a head-on with them. And he did not have functional seatbelts in the car. And so I think that, because if you look at the damage, it was a big crash, but it should not have been
passenger
fatal.
Cabin was, the occupant cell was.
And all three of them had helmets on. So they were all in cars that were clearly prototypes. And I assume the BMW had to be. But either way, the BMW guy survived. He didn't. And I'm sure it was a function of having no seatbelt on. But my question is, what happened, right? There was never released, no sort of, gotcha piece was released on it. But if you look at how things are phrased by what the people around him said, Road and Track did an article, I think it was Road and Track, with interviewing people around him and said, this was a stretch of road that he had done a lot and he knew it well. So this was surprising that this happened. Well, that tells me he was driving very, very quickly around it and the car just bit him or something happened. There was a speck of dirt. But my guess is, not to speak ill of the past, my guess is that he lost control of the car and had a head-on. And given how that car feels, I'm not all that surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, you would assume he did a million laps of the Nürburgring in the car. He probably knew how to handle it well.
Yeah, I mean, he was getting it under control, but there happened to not be space to recover.
Right. Or, a deer jumped out. We'll never know. I mean,
sure.
You never know. But I really like the car when I do research on it and knowing about all the technology in it and whatever else. But I don't love it from an emotional standpoint. I adore the way it sounds. And if it weren't for the fact that the rest of the car was so good, that transmission would ruin it to the point where it would be
unconsiderable.
A zero.
Yeah.
But it still is those cars would be worth 5 times the price or 10 times the price, I think, if they were manuals.
I give the car a lot of credit because it does something that not a lot of modern cars do, which is that you feel very close to the car. There's not a lot of intermediation. Like a lot of cars feel insular and boring. This car is the opposite of insular and boring in every respect. In that sense, it feels like an old car because there's not this sort of, I don't know, syntheticness to it, aside from your comments about the sound. But there is in most modern cars, I feel like they're so flattering and they make you feel so competent that there's this element of the car doing stuff instead of you. And this car is not like that. No. This car's an old car vibe in that sense, where it'll do what you ask it to do, even if it's something dumb. And but in a way that, I don't know. I liked, of course, cars where I can go to the limit, and that was a car that I dared not do it.
Same.
Because I never got any sense of sort of comfort or well-being or like sort of instinctiveness from operating that car, and so I never wanted to go anywhere close to the limit in it.
To me, it was one of those things. So I got in the car and it was 5:00 in the morning, and it was fairly cool out. It was summer, but summer in the Bay Area, so fairly cool out. And the first time I sort of started moving and I laid into the throttle, it had Cup 2 or Cup 2Rs on it, really aggressive tires, and I didn't know.
And those tires are garbage when it's moist or cold or anything other than fully warmed up and dry.
And it laid. I mean, I was probably only 3/4 throttle, and second gear. Engine was fully warmed up. We had driven.
Transited over the base of the road, yeah.
And it laid tire. It lit them up and laid tire for quite some time. And even though my first impression was, wow, the steering is really talkative. It's incredibly responsive off center. Yes. I actually didn't feel the yaw moment. And so I laid a lot of tire for a long period of time thinking, why we are actually sideways. And that is I don't like that combination of steering that feels talkative, but doesn't tell you what you need to know. I'd rather, frankly, and I hate to even say this, have something like Porsche E-Pass, which is kind of dead, but really wakes up when you're sideways. So this is that sort of like tricks you into thinking, oh, it's going to tell me what's going on, and you don't quite know, and then it's you're making up for that yaw afterwards. But I don't love the seating position. I really don't like the transmission controls. You can't engage reverse until you're neutral. So you can't go from first and pull the reverse switch. You have to go into neutral and then into reverse, which is okay. But then you're done backing out. You can't go from reverse into first. You have to go neutral first. There's a bunch of and the e-brake button is hidden. I mean, there's just a bunch of like UX issues with the car that I don't. The mouse.
The HVAC system almost brought me to tears. I found the HVAC system to be incredibly inscrutable.
I don't think I used it.
Yeah, well, good for you. That's probably why you haven't died from just stress. Not stress, but I was some circumstances where I was rapidly trying to make a climate change in the car while I was underway, and it was like just absolutely...
Yeah, I mean, it's got that.
Bad.
It's all in the touchscreen, right? You have temperature controls, like real physical controls for.
Yeah, but there's a lot of like scrolling around. I don't even remember because this was now 3 years ago. But I just remember being like, "That's shocking for a Japanese car that's not that old. That something should be so inscrutable."
That generation with the sort of movable mouse of Lexus controls was terrible. But I mean, the car, it has all of the ingredients meant, if they only made 500 of them, they were fully carbon. I mean, I love the SMC, the sheet molding compound body panels they're impregnated with micro balloons of glass. And I remember Alexis telling me this. I think they're actually vacuum filled, but I couldn't verify that. Sense. But you have little glasses that are glass beads, microscopic glass beads that are filled with vacuum, i.e. filled with nothing. So they take up space, but don't add weight. It's a way of lightweighting what would otherwise be a very heavy body. Kind of bizarre that the body itself wasn't carbon, but I think Toyota didn't have a chance to develop the technology to make carbon body panels. They were too busy making a carbon chassis for the car and learning how to do that in real time.
I mean, for me, that car is an experience for sure, and I give it a lot of credit for being experienced because not that many cars that in my opinion, built after 2010 or choose year 2000, 2005, 2010, whatever. Not that many cars built in what I consider the modern era, which apparently is now 25 years long. I don't know. Are genuine experiences. And that car is an experience. It terrifies me. It makes me ill at ease. It makes me feel things. I'd rather feel ill at ease than feel nothing. Yeah. And, what other car? The McLaren Senna is like that also.
I drove it so briefly, and all I remember was that the whole car was shaking. The panels were all vibrating.
If you leave the car in neutral idling, then the exterior panels of the car are visibly vibrating, and it's rear wheel drive and has 789 horsepower, whatever it has. I mean, it
feels like it wants to kill you.
Yes, and I liked that. I liked it for that. I get far and few between our modern cars that really give me that experience. So I respect it for that. I would not particularly personally want to own an LFA. I don't know. Yeah, just confirming that's the case.
Same. Same. It's
I respect it, and I sort of am intrigued by it, and I admire it immensely, and I like operating them for short periods of time when I'm not too concerned about whether I live that survive that day. It's not a death trap by any means.
No, my God. No.
This is all also I should add the result of me naturally seeking or wanting to seek the limits of the cars that I drive. And if you're not that personality type, then a lot of this sort of commentary won't apply to you. If you're happy to just cruise around and one gear too low and listen to the noises the engine makes, and then I think it's probably a very...
Well, then it's a bargain because the only way to get a better sound is to, somehow he has to kill someone and take their allocation of a $5 million GMA.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, the idea of a rational supercar is a little bit
flawed.
It's antithetical to what I'd rather have overstressed shit.
You think it's a rational supercar?
I do. I think Toyota's a rational company, and I think Toyota was too rational in building the car, and so it just works. It works too well as a car, and I think the engine is the engine is honed to perfection. The interior is honed to perfection. And then the handling.
Very nice interior.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And
then
the handling is
the handling
not.
isn't, right? And so what I'd rather is a
for my needs anyway.
shitty interior with an engine that's a little gruffer with that ride and handling quality, right? I mean, I think there's a bit of a mismatch there.
I see.
You know,
yeah, lack of harmony.
Yeah. It's the whole car is like, you know, I think it's stunningly beautiful, but it's also sanitized, right? Looking, it's not crazy. It's not nuts. It's very sort of restrained. And then the sound, it should be nuts, but it's not. It's loud, but it's not that loud. It's musical beyond measure, but there's an insanity missing from it.
It's missing filth.
Yeah.
It misses filth.
It's a bit raspy. I mean, it can be pretty raspy at times, but it's just...
I have no complaints about the sound.
No, I don't have a complaint about the sound, but I have a preference. And I think my preference would be something a little bit...
my preference is like sort of carbureted, filthy...
Just a car that drives the way that does, I want to sound like a cross-plane V8. Imagine...
you know how I feel about cross-plane V8 noises.
You're thinking flat plane.
Flat plane, yes. Sorry.
Yeah,
cross-plane, yes.
No.
Okay, yes. 100% on board. Yes,
So,
it needs to be
right?
uncivilized and sort of rude
That's the
and
mismatch
like
on that car.
kinky or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Some filthy like fucking, you know, I guess the Mercedes 6.2 liter plus,
M106.
right?
At one M156 that was as demonstrated in the SLS.
Yeah. Like that, I feel like that noise, not necessarily that motor, but like a cross-plane crank V8 would fit the rest of the car's character more than that V10 does.
It's the sort of sensation of being ill at ease at speed, and the harshness is very Cobra-y.
I was just going to say that, man. Yeah. Like, so there's a mismatch there that I don't emotionally love, even though I rationally love. And let me also say, I own cars that I love for rational reasons, right? The Cosworth Mercedes, the W201 is the car that I love the most of all of my cars for rational reasons. This is the car that moved to automotive technology. This is the car that started the horsepower war. This is the first of this and this and that.
And the panel gaps and the quality of construction and the refinement of the powertrain when you don't want it to be nasty, but then when you want it to sort of go wacko, it does.
Right. But the thing about that car is, even though I love it for all of those emotional reasons, when I drive it, it lives up to all of them, right? Then it becomes I look at the car and I stare at it, I love it and whatever, and then I drive it and then I fall completely in love with it again for very, very different reasons. It's ass out all the time. The engine's just, the fucking power delivery is mad. Everything is just so great. I feel like the LFA's engine is so great in terms of its sound, but I don't come away from it falling in love with it emotionally after having fallen in love with it rationally. So
that's a great way to put it.
And I feel bad saying that.
My conclusion was similar, surprisingly similar, actually, to it.
I would love to spend more time in an LFA, but I don't, this car is beautiful and had no miles on it. And I just don't.
I don't think your opinion will change too meaningfully. I think that the car really comes into its own, like on a racetrack, I'm sure it would be pretty great.
It's the first time I ever drove it and it scared the shit out of me.
Yeah. So maybe not great on a racetrack. I don't know. But smooth road, really to me critical on a smooth road. Like I was on one road that was very narrow and no center line and cambered wrong. And the car was just so uncomfortable doing that type of stuff. And the fact of the matter is that that's the environment where for me to give a car a 10, it has to be not just comfortable, but like joyful and gratifying in that environment. It was very interesting because the day before I'd driven, you're going to laugh, an NSX Type R. And I like drove it like on a road like that. And the car was really just gratifying and joyful in that experience. And so I was kind of expecting the opposite.
Yeah. I'm still hearing you.
Well, it's a tight road, and the car has short gearing, with the LFA, if you want to listen to the motor, it's a high speed car, it's tall gearing. But I felt so happy after spending a day hauling ass in an NSX Type R the day before. And then the following day to do that in an LFA or try, and I was like, I can't believe how much more I prefer the NSX-R for the type of use cases. I used it exactly the way I used my 964, and it was really happy to do that.
I am shocked to hear you say this, because one of the conversations that I had with this week with someone who's very much a chassis tuner was we both agreed that the NSX does nothing well, and other than being pretty. I just don't. There's nothing I like about the original NSX. I need to drive.
I felt very comfortable in that car hauling ass.
Comfortable, it made me bored.
No, not bored. I was having a good time.
I need to drive a 3.2 liter car because I've only ever driven 3 liter. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe
Type R.
Or Type R. Well, I mean, ideally a Type R.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've
never driven a 3.2.
Type R is not a 3.2 liter?
They made both.
Oh, they made
made
both.
3.0 and 3.2, and I've only driven a 3.0 Type R.
Oh, but have you driven a 3 liter base car?
Yes.
Okay. And you don't hate it?
It was a little unremarkable.
It's a lot unremarkable.
Yeah.
Okay, good. As long as we're on the... All right. So clearly NSX Type R is where to be. I don't know. That LFA, the story behind it, I thought was fantastic. I love... basically we have Akio Toyota to thank for this whole car and all of GR. I love that I didn't know where the name Gazoo came from. I love that it was just
the World Wide Web.
Yeah. It was just some fucking name that they're like, I don't know, what are we going to do? Pick that name. Okay, Gazoo. Yeah. Gazoo Racing. Okay, what's your name? And, if you guys haven't watch the Revelations video, and I'm not going to spoil it here, but the genesis of the name Morizo, which of course is the Morizo package now on the... GR Corolla. That all comes from the LFA. And I sort of loved as I was reading all of this research on the car, especially early on, about how much money Toyota lost developing this car. And they spent $1 billion on it. And if you divide $1 billion by the 500 units they were going to need to make, it's $2 million a piece just to cover the R&D costs on the car with no materials, and then none of the the carbon weaving looms that they had to make. And all
which is that facility now where the LFA was made is now used for this. I think it's very comedic. It's very Toyota.
I hope it's like seat fabric or some shit.
No, carbon fiber, right? Carbon fiber manufacturing, Mirai. I know, isn't that awful? That's what became of the LFA factory. Mirai building.
That's funny. Although current Mirai is really good looking, annoyingly. Not really good looking, but it's not the first one.
Everything is good looking compared to the first Mirai.
Cool story. But I love that everyone bitched and moaned about how much money Toyota lost, and at the same time they were racing in Formula One, spending multiples the money.
I think the car also deserves to be respected the way it is and sought after, and I think it is a collectible car. We always talk about how we like things that aren't perfect, and there's certain types of imperfections that we like. This car has imperfections. They're not the type of imperfections that I like. Some people are like, you talk about how you like imperfection, and this one's imperfect, and why don't you like it? It's the wrong kind of imperfections for me.
Are we allowed to talk about a certain Italian, French, Swiss thing that looks like something but sounds like a croissant?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. So you had me meet you on the side of the road,
yes.
And I showed up in my Ferrari Daytona, and you showed up in your Ferrari Daytona. No, this is
neither of us showed up in Ferrari
Neither
Daytonas.
of us did, but I showed up in a shitty Rover 3500, and you were in a Croisette.
The Croisette.
The only one.
Yes.
Which is a Ferrari 365. So we talked... A couple weeks ago, we talked about the V12s that I wanted to own, and one of them is a 365 GT4 2+2.
Yes, this is a car that a lot of people will recognize as a 400i.
412, same body, right?
But it started as a 365.
I have never driven one. It was on my list, but I'd never driven one. And it shares a lot of styling cues with the 365 Daytona GTB? Yes,
GTB4.
Yep. Daytona. And so it was really cool to see these two cars together with their styling. So much of their styling was shared, including the gauges and whatever
the Rover, and the 365.
However, you want to talk about things that are imperfect in all of the wrong ways that makes it right. That Croisette is a station wagon, effectively shooting brake, 2-door, 2+2 with a cathode ray television in the back.
Yes.
Station wagon Ferrari that was one-off built by a French lunatic in Switzerland or something. Yeah.
Swiss lunatic. Styled by Michelotto, built in England.
It's fucking horrible.
I think it's just magnificent.
In all of the right ways. It's magnificent. But to your point, right? We like flaws and character, and I think that is just the fucking bee's knees.
I do too. I desperately wish I had enough to buy it myself, but You have to sell it to someone with deeper pockets than I have.
Hideous.
I think it's
amazing.
I don't think it's hideous. I think it's kind of good looking.
I mean, the scoop spoiler on the back doesn't sort of comes out of nowhere. I think the car's amazing. I agree. If you're going to have a 365, have that one. That's the one to have.
I think it's good looking.
I
know no one else thinks it's good looking.
Well, look, no one thinks the Rover's good looking either. I did make a post that I have pictures I took the same night. I'm like, is it me or is this thing really pretty? And most of the responses were like, it's you. But I think, there's no accounting for taste. Yes. I have none of it. I have a lot of taste. It's just all bad. No, I think that car's amazing, but it speaks to me. It speaks to me because it's so out there and so wrong, right? I don't really think it's ugly, but I don't think the design of the rear of the car matches the front.
I don't think it's conventionally attractive.
No,
I will give it that.
But I love that about it. I love that it's so different. And maybe there is a little bit too much of the relentless pursuit of perfection in some of the details of the LFA that make me just less excited about it than I would if it was a little bit shitty.
I don't think that part bothers me. The part, as we've discussed now, is the transmission and the fact that it's not that approachable or friendly to use the limits.
I want to just drive one like around town. I just want to sort of like...
It rides hard and the transmission is dumb.
But is it dumb enough to really bother? Like driving it, transiting a couple miles in the morning to whatever...
those transmissions work best when you're really banging off gear changes. It's like a Ferrari F1.
Or when you're driving slow and you just, sort of lift... Click the paddle, let it shift.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a perfect example. Toyota changed the weighting of the paddles.
Yes.
So that the downshift paddle was, I think, twice the effort of the upshift paddle, right? This is something you would never fucking ever notice or be conscious of, right? It's that level of detail of the car, but then missed the forest for the trees. The car should have been a manual or even a dual clutch. They tested a dual clutch. They said they didn't like it because it was charmless. I find that to be likely...
Very un-Japanese.
Well, it's probably bullshit. They probably just couldn't get a dual clutch done in time. The LFA's single clutch automated manual controls were developed for the MR2 Spider, which everyone always forgets was... I didn't even know until recently, to be honest with you, was available with an automated manual. Like I saw one and I'm like, where the fuck? And so they had that lying around and they used it, whatever. But I don't like those transmissions. I would never have one, but they work just fine driving around. And so that's how I'd like to experience an LFA. Like somebody should hand me the keys and with a very comprehensive insurance policy because they're worth so much money that I'm scared to do. And I would drive it for a couple of days and just see what it was like to live with. Because I think it's probably pretty good at that.
The ride quality.
Is it that bad? I mean, watch the video. You watch the video and the GoPro.
Yeah, when I was watching the video, I was like, it gave me all this PTSD about one of the things that most upset me. Cars that ride too hard, to me, are like for road use it's a really big deal breaker. My 964 rides hard at low speeds, but it's very fluid at speed. Yeah. And so I can forgive it for that, whereas the LFA has never... to me, it became fluid in my experience.
You're going to shit yourself over a T50.
Yeah. I love that. To me, that's like one of those like weird characteristics that's really important to me is like fluidity. Like the 991.2 GT3 is really good at this, surprisingly. I drove it back to back with an AMG GT.
Oh God.
And the AMG GT, like that's another one of those cars where like the ride quality, you're just like, this is so unforgivably bad.
It invents its own bumps.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, even the E63 is
invents its own bumps.
It's like this. And you're like, it's a Mercedes-Benz. How do they not have this bullshit figured out? Freaking Porsche does it in the GT3 and I'm driving a Mercedes E-Class and it can't do it.
Your C43.
Yeah, the C43 is the origin
of the
that,
shit ride.
Of that, because I don't remember whether the C36 does this or not. Because
I've never driven one, yeah.
I had one, but I put,
a mile on it.
Yeah, I stupidly bought a one-owner, low-mileage, like super rare color car and then never drove it. And so I have no specific recollection. Whereas as soon as I bought the C43, I was like, because I just read all the magazine articles. And the magazine articles, they always complain about how hard the car rides or how harsh the impacts are, especially at low speeds. And I don't have that note in my brain from the C36.
C43 to me always felt like an S-Class with sand in the dampers, right? And I mean, at high speeds, it's really good, but at low speeds, it just beats you up a bit. Yeah. And that has absolutely become an AMG hallmark. That GT is undrivably harsh. for no reason, for absolutely no. To your point, if GT3s can get away with, but even the GT3s ride stiff.
Yeah, but I was shocked by how big of a night and day difference in harshness there is, because I was on a drive with a friend who had an AMG GT, and we switched cars partway through. So we're in the same day, you know, butt goes directly from one seat to the other, and I was just, I cannot believe how much harsher the AMG GT is than a 991 GT3.
I think that's why you think the GT3 is good, just because the AMG is that bad. Because whenever I drive a GT3, I'm like, man, these things are firm.
Yeah, and then you would add is bumpy road mode on a Ferrari.
And I wish you could leave them in bumpy road mode because they're fine. But I mean, all it takes is one drive in a McLaren to understand that none of this is necessary. Yeah. Like you can have a supercar that rides like a Rolls Royce and then does all the things.
Yeah, that's the miracle. This is the thing about modern cars I most like, actually. Because historically in the past with high performance old cars, if you wanted the thing to handle, there was going to be a ride trade-off, and we have somehow through the magic of modern technology made that engineering trade-off no longer have to be a trade-off. And that's the thing I like most.
And you can do it with different ways. You can do it with active dampers. The T50 is passive dampers.
Yeah, so the F1 did it with this sort of isolation thing that they did where it had the suspension was all rigidly mounted to subframes, and then they put the rubber in the system. Instead of it being in the suspension, it's between the subframe and the chassis.
On the McLaren,
on the F1. Yeah, and so there's like cleverness that went into that, you know, I guess same guy, there's probably some additional cleverness enhancements over the ensuing decades. But to do that with passive dampers is to me quite impressive.
I'm trying to think of other early cars, sort of, you know, 20 years plus old that did that really were comfortable.
The first car I experienced it in was in a 458.
458 rides well. You know what does it really well is Corvette. C8 Corvette. The defining characteristic of a Stingray, annoyingly, is its ride quality.
It's for old people, right?
But I don't actually think this is a good thing. I don't think, you know, having a Rolls Roycean ride should be the defining characteristic of a.
It shouldn't be defining, but it should be present in my opinion.
Fucking
I love
amazing.
It.
That car rides like a dream, and the Z06 don't. The Z06 is really stiff.
More or less than an AMG GT.
Less. Everything's less. I don't think I can think of a car. Z4 was so stiff I could barely drive it on a bumpy road. I'm trying to think, but AMG, I turned around. I went for a ride on a bumpy road, and it just was miserable. You know, it's transferring all these loads to your eyes. And so like your eyes start to go wonky, and you're like, I can't fucking see where I'm going, and this hurts. And oh my God, I'm in soft mode. How the fuck did they do this?
Well, because German roads are very good.
Yeah, but they're not that good. I mean, no road in the world is that good. That's just a poor choice.
Yeah, I agree.
Audi will often do that with you know, used to back in the day more like, you know, an S4 was just undrivably
Which generation?
A B6. Hold on. What was the B6 was the S4 RS4. Yeah. That S4 was
B7 is the facelift of that.
But we had a long-term RS4 at Automobile. I talk about this all the time. We had an B7, and then we got a S4 sort of short-term loaner in there, and I drove them back to back on the same road, and it was unbelievable that the RS car drove like a dream. The bumps didn't bother it. It just didn't care about anything. It was fluid. It was wonderful. It was comfortable. And you step down to an S4, and the ride quality went from wonderful, stiff but wonderful, to like, get me out of this car. I never want to see it again. And it's just it's a sort of characteristic of somebody in a management position who's like, Sporty means stiff.
Yeah.
And they just don't understand that it's not only is it not necessary, this is the reason why half the car companies, when you hit the sport button, they go into sport mode for a couple seconds and then gradually come back out. You know this, right?
No, I didn't know this.
Oh, shit. This secret's out.
Amazing.
BMW does this. When you go into like full stiff suspension mode, the shocks go full stiff for 30 seconds and then start to relax.
Good for them.
Often what they'll do is they'll keep the same base tuning. Once you get that initial spike and they're like, oh, now I'm in sporty mode, you forget about it. It'll go back to the same exact map, but it will just clip off the soft part of the map. So it's basically riding exactly the same way after a minute or so, or after some period of time. I don't know how long it is. It goes back to the same ride, but it just can never stiffen enough. So it can never soften quite as much. So you'll lose maybe a little bit of float, but you won't. It's not going to actually ride any stiffer. It doesn't have any better control. It's there as a gimmick to shut the people up who are like, I want sport mode.
I hate modern cars.
Well, I hate everything.
Well, on that curmudgeonly note,
Yes.
I guess it's time to conclude this episode. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Carmudgeon Show.
I think we might have no episode next week because it's...
Oh, the September
might be the
America
Labor Day
holiday?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah. And also, I don't think we would have been able to get one out anyway because we will have been at the Monterey Car Week.
Yes.
So the next time you see us, we will be
See
comprehensively
you in
exhausted.
September.
That's a song.
Yeah.
You should sing that for the
No,
audience.
I think we should actually conclude. Great. Thanks for joining us.
See you in September. Come on. Should I blow out the
I don't know
mic
the
there?
words.
The words were literally "see you in September."
Oh, well.
I'll see you next Tuesday.
Monday.
I'm not saying that.